Time for our weekly political update. I'm Dave Morris here in the Oklahoman's video studio. I am joined on this Thursday morning via Skype from Chris Castile, joining us from our sister newspaper in Washington, D.C., the Washington Examiner. Sir, how are you?
I'm doing great, Dave. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate that, and we always look forward to catching up with you every week. And this week you've written a lot about the Oklahoma delegation and the Supreme Court nomination that may or may not happen regarding Judge Merrick Garland. Inhofe and Lanford met with him this week.
They did. They got that over with.
Okay, that's one way of saying it, right?
Well, which is exactly, I think, how they kind of looked at it. They, because of Merrick Garland's connection to Oklahoma, and it's a very strong one, even though it was brief and a long time ago. He was a top Justice Department official here in D.C. when the Murrah building was bombed in 1995, and immediately, kind of took up residence in Oklahoma City to run that investigation and the prosecution of the conspirators in that, and just was really widely respected and admired for the job, that he did back in Oklahoma City back then. Not just for the meticulous investigation, but just because he kept the families involved the entire time. There were things that he did, that were really just because for the families, the closed circuit hookup of the courtroom so that they could all watch it. Things like so. Anyway, it would have been hard for Senators Jim Inhofe and James Lanford, both Republicans, to not meet with Merrick Garland, given that background. And it's a part of the story that the White House has been pushing for ever since he was nominated in March. His whole Oklahoma City connection. So they met with him. Some Republican senators have won't even meet with him. And the whole narrative here, as everybody knows, is that Justice Antonin Scalia died in February. Republicans immediately said, we're not going to consider a replacement for him this year. We're going to wait till the presidential election plays out, let the next president pick the nominee to replace Scalia. And so it's pointless to make a nominee because we're not going to go through the process. So they stuck to that, but President Obama nominated Merrick Garland, and to get back to the normal courtesy is for him to meet with all the senators, and Inhofe and Lanford did that yesterday.
So they got that out of the way. Anything that will come of that?
No. I mean, they met with him behind closed doors, and they went in, I should say everybody meets with him behind closed doors, but they would not even pose with him for a picture before or after. I mean, it was all, they took him in through a side door in the office. They didn't come out. The staff, their top staffers came into Inhofe's office to meet him and escort him into Inhofe's office. So they said that before, they even had the hearing, we're not going to talk to him about legal issues. This isn't some kind of job interview. We're paying this courtesy, but we're going to thank him for what he did in Oklahoma City, and that's, I think, what they did.
All right, Chris Castile joining us via Skype from our sister newspaper in Washington, D.C., the Washington Examiner. That's coverage you can find online at newsok.com. And of course, continuing coverage in our newspaper, the Oklahoman. And you also had coverage of former Senator Tom Coburn back on the Hill on this subject and another subject, but basically his address was, Senate, do your job?
Well, yeah, Senator Coburn was up here for a hearing yesterday at the Homeland Affairs and Homeland Security and Government Affairs committee that he used to serve on. Coburn left the Senate early in 2015, and everybody knows, Coburn's big deal was waste in government. And, a few years ago, he got an amendment passed that requires the Government Accountability Office, kind of the congressional auditing arm, to do a report every single year across the federal government, identifying duplicative efforts, like in job training and other things like that. How many agencies do you have doing the same thing? And it's been like an incredible amount of work, but has led to a lot of billions of dollars in savings every year. And so the latest report about waste and duplication came out last week, and this committee called Coburn up to testify about it, talk about it yesterday. So they had kind of a break in the committee yesterday, and I grabbed Coburn at this break and just asked him, what do you think about, how what the Senate's doing with Merrick Garland, the Supreme Court nominee? Coburn was on the Judiciary Committee for most of the time that he was in the Senate, and during that time, the committee considered four different current Supreme Court justices. So Coburn knows this process very well. He became very disgusted with the hearing process to the point that he basically called for the elimination of public hearings. But I did ask him, what do you think the Senate should be doing here with Garland? He said they should do their duty. They should have an up or down vote in committee. That's their job. He thinks that this looks incredibly partisan and that there's no reason for it. His point to me was, look, you don't have to have a battle like this. Just vote him up or down. And everybody knows which way it would go. Because Republicans control the committee, control the Senate, Garland would not come out of committee, but at least they would hold the vote is, Coburn's position.
Chris, are you hearing any sort of sense of movement in this situation?
None. It won't move.
So we're looking at a U.S. Supreme Court for the rest of the year with 8 members?
And probably, Dave, until at least this time next year, because just because of how long it takes once, once you start vetting people, let's say, it's either, we're kind of assuming it's Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton at this point, they've got to get in office, they've got to start thinking about who it is, and they've got, extensive background checks on these people. Then you got to run the traps, and then you have to go through this whole process. Once they nominate them, you have to go through this whole process in the Senate, which I assume that they will next time. Have the hearings, have the votes, and so you're looking at most of next term, probably the term that begins in October of 2016. Most of even the next term will be an 8-justice term, I believe.
Well, Chris, let's turn to the presidential topic. You mentioned the names of Trump and Clinton, and after big wins for those two candidates this week, they look to be the presumptive nominees for the Republicans and Democrats. Yesterday, Senator Ted Cruz said Carly Fiorina, a former presidential candidate and the former executive at HP, would be his vice presidential running mate, if you will. That's the earliest since, I believe, 1976 that someone announced a vice presidential candidate. But then over the weekend, we heard word of Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin as a potential vice president's running mate for Donald Trump.
I haven't read a lot about the Ted Cruz Fiorina thing. I was kind of busy with those stories that I did yesterday. But my immediate take on him doing that, besides the fact that he's just trying pretty much to do anything right now because he's clearly going to lose, was that it was a California play.
Which is up next in the whole lineup.
But I think it's actually more than a month away. I think it's in early June. But that it's going to be their last chance, and I don't think that that's even a reasonable expectation for them at this point. But so I don't think it helps them. You mentioned 1976. I actually didn't know that until yesterday. And of course, that was Ronald Reagan, and of course, he did not get the nomination. I think the same thing.
Didn't work 40 years ago. Probably not going to work in 2016.
And the Mary, we should provide some context for this Mary Fallin thing. I know people immediately started talking about it like it was some kind of feasible thing. My response to it, which I tweeted, I believe it was Saturday or Sunday, not going to happen. She's not going to make even a short list. And but this whole suggestion of Mary Fallin came from the lieutenant governor of South Carolina. So, I'm not trying to demean the guy, but it struck me that it may have been as much a shot at Nikki Haley, who's the governor of South Carolina, and also, an oft-mentioned possible running mate, as a boost for Mary Fallin. Mary Fallin's never endorsed Trump or paid any interest in being VP. And let's just be honest, she brings nothing to the ticket. She would bring absolutely nothing to a ticket that Trump is going to have to balance in some way. It's not going to help it's not going to help him in any swing state. We all know presidential election is actually fought in just a handful of states, and Oklahoma is pretty reliably red. She has zero foreign policy and national security expertise, something else that Trump is going to need. People are going to be nervous about that, I think, to some extent, and that's something he has to address. President Obama addressed that. That was seen as his failing in 2008. So he picked Joe Biden, who is a longtime senator, a longtime chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee too, and so there. Enough on what that Trump. It's not helped by her, but why would she even do it? Besides the fact that she's never professed any support whatsoever for Trump, imagine the vetting that takes place, and then the publicity, and then the digging by the media that goes into, that follows a VP selection like that. I mean, her family, everybody in her family, everybody in her husband's family. That's what you subject people to, and I just don't see her, even if she was, a credible possibility. I don't see her subjecting her family to that.
Talking with Chris Castile, one final point. You mentioned Vice President Joe Biden. He arrived in Iraq for a surprise visit this morning. So continuing those foreign affairs relations, if you will. Hey, Chris, one final question for you. As we look at Trump and Clinton, have we ever seen two candidates perhaps with such high negative polling?
I don't know that, but what I've read repeatedly is no, that it would be absolutely unprecedented to have two candidates with these kinds of negatives oppose each other in the general presidential election. It really is just an amazing situation there, which. I just don't think you can predict what's the outcome of it because of that very thing. I know you've got all these polls, at this point about how, who fares best against Hillary Clinton. But number one, national polls are irrelevant in a presidential race. I mean, we all know that. It's a few states. I don't know why people make a big deal out of those polls. So, but I think that they would track probably in some of these states. Whether it's Florida, Michigan, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, it would probably be reflected in every single one of these states. Hillary Clinton has been known, for 25 years almost, and people have very definite opinions. You saw it in Oklahoma in the primary in March. I think as much as a pro Bernie Sanders vote, that was an anti-Hillary Clinton vote in Oklahoma. And I think the same has been true in other states. I mean, the reason that Bernie Sanders has racked up some of the numbers that he has in some of these states is because of people who just don't really want Hillary to be president. I mean, one thing I'm thinking about, doing for the weekend is a little story. I talked to Tom Coburn about this yesterday. Tom Coburn at one point, I thought it was baseless at the time, but it was speculated that he might run as an independent in the fall because he dislikes Trump and Hillary Clinton so much. I mean, he told me that he would never do that. He told me yesterday, he's still not a Trump supporter, of course, but he said, I would never vote for Hillary Clinton. And, I think that as much as people dislike Trump, there's just that dislike for her as well. So I just think it's crazy to try to predict what's going to happen in this race. Introduce me to somebody who's been right about it so far, going back to last summer of 15 when Trump first got into the race. I'll listen to them. But other than that, I don't tend to put much stock in some of the predictions that are made about what's going to happen in the fall.
Good stuff, as always, from Chris Castile in our Washington, D.C. office today at the Washington Examiner. Chris, we appreciate it. Thanks for the analysis.
I'm glad to do it, Dave.
All right, more coverage from Chris can be found in the Oklahoman and online at newsok.com.